Thank you.
Thank you.
No sneaking that one in there. So we've made it past the into the saints that are into the post Anglican schism from the Roman Catholic Church, so that we got to the point where they're no longer, we're looking at saints that are Anglican, so they're no longer canonized and given the official title of saint. But a lot of really interesting stories. They're honored in our calendar and commemorated as holy people that have contributed significantly to the church one way or another. We talked about that a little bit last week. I know Bud and Jen weren't here, but that's we're moving on. And our first session of the class, we talked about all the different ways that saints are identified. And the Anglican way is to say, well, they're heroes and they're saints, and we put them on the calendar, but we don't call them saints. We don't give them the title. Which
Can we create saints now? Can the Supreme Grand Lizard Bishop, can he
well,
sainthood to
the
somebody?
Roman Catholics and the Orthodox still
I know
do.
the Roman Catholics do.
The Orthodox do too.
We don't.
They can't. No. But these are our saints. We just don't give them that title.
But they're gonna,
I would like to. I think we should form a
they're gonna
committee.
end now. That's
Yeah.
right.
But are they in the book of lesser saints?
No, you're a major saint.
Me.
They.
That's what
Are
I'm saying.
they?
Oh, I thought you.
I know where I am.
Yeah, Peter's coming up in a couple of weeks on the topic.
Yeah, is there a St. Bud?
Just the opposite.
A lot of these things are very conflicted people, Bud. So
Oh, I'm
I just
conflicted.
remembered, I imagine.
I'm the personification.
Evelyn Underhill was a writer in the 19th century in England, and she was a mystic, and she's honored on our calendar. And
How do you define mystic?
that's very that's tough. I don't know. They're
It's
very
mystic.
spiritual people that are very in touch with the spiritual world and have a different viewpoint.
And maybe have had some kind of
Speak up so they can.
otherworldly experiences that you cannot explain.
Right. Yes.
We had a mystic who was a member of our church.
Here, we had a mystic.
I've heard y'all talk about him, but I don't.
Her,
Yeah, but I don't.
Caroline, followed her.
Edelman.
I have to think about
See,
it.
mystic to me has sort of a negative connotation. I guess I just have to get over it.
Yeah, you do.
She sang in the choir at one point. I didn't really know her. She was
What made her a mystic in, by your definition? Or what do you think people,
because Joe called her that.
Father Joe called her a mystic?
And she was referred to, and she, if you can look her up on Wikipedia.
Really?
If we
I'll
can
have
remember
to
the name.
find out her name. I'll have to find out.
How long ago was
I
it?
Googled mystic
That
Louisville,
Joe is
Kentucky
Father
singer.
Joe's tenure.
She lived not too far from here in Anchorage.
Oh,
She wrote books. and everything.
I wish we could have asked Joe why he labeled her a mystic.
Sometimes mystics, people that are labeled mystics, have dreams or waking dreams that you cannot explain.
Uh-huh.
Well, you know, when we talk about Gillian of Norwich, she would have been considered a mystic because she had all these visions,
Mhm.
13 or 14 visions, and ended up writing all her books about it and her theology based on these visions. That would have qualified her as a mystic.
abrupt experiences of the peaceful, undifferentiated plane of reality. Wow.
Ooh, abrupt.
Yes,
That's
she was an only child, and her early mystical insights included that abrupt experience of peaceful, undifferentiated plane of reality. Still
now, I was
does.
an engineer, that's English to me.
Yeah.
It is really.
Abrupt experiences of the peaceful, undifferentiated plane of reality. Anybody want to translate that?
No,
Right.
you have to be an engineer.
Janice, do you want to translate that?
She might have gone get a cup of coffee.
That's a deep statement.
Plane of reality.
Well, maybe the next sentence will Just rather.
It's gonna get worse.
She was an only child. She was very devout to her parents and her husband. Never had any kids.
Well, that makes sense.
And-
You must be mystical then.
And interesting enough, nobody in her family was terribly religious. Her husband wasn't terribly religious. None of them were all very interested in it. She ended up writing books, several books actually. Yeah, I recognize it. Yeah.
We have Underhills that lived a family that lives here in Louisville.
Oh yeah.
Underhills.
Wonder if they're related. So her mystical experiences were a lifelong quest for her to figure out what they mean. Her father and her brother and her husband were both writers and barristers and yachtsmen. So these were wealthy barrister, upper class, influential British aristocracy type people. Which I guess is why she had time to write and have mystical experiences, right?
Yes.
She grew up with her husband, Stuart Moore, and they were married in 1907. And pretty involved with her life as a wife. Traveled all over Europe, Switzerland, France, Italy, and developed an interest in Catholicism on her travels, visiting all the churches and monasteries. She was a cousin of Francis Underhill, Bishop of Bath and Wells. So she had some Anglicanism in her family and grew up in the church, but didn't grow up terribly religious, was kind of agnostic for a long time until on her travels started exploring Roman Catholicism. And from there moved more into the Anglican side of things. There's kind of a blend, sometimes referred to as Anglican Catholics, people who are in the Anglican Church but have a propensity towards the Roman Catholic way of approaching things. She was in that classification. Her friends call her Mrs. Moore. I know, right? She was a prolific author, published over 30 books, either under her maiden name Underhill or a pseudonym John Cordelier, because back then women didn't publish; they had to use men's names to get published. So that some of them were fictional novels, which had a very spiritual side to them. In which case, the characters often personified, spiritual concepts, and they're very metaphorical. And then later she actually started writing books about mysticism. The more she had experiences with it, became
Neoplatonism. She fooled around with uranium. Plato.
Neoplatonism, yeah.
It's
It's your job to look these words up.
Revival of Platonic philosophy.
Anglo-Catholic.
Yeah, Anglo-Catholic.
Is that a separate species? I mean,
Not really. It's really an Anglican who has
It's known as
Roman
High
Catholic
Church in
tendencies. Yeah, right. Yeah,
Thank you.
High Church England, right?
England. We would be considered high church because we swing incense, stuff like that.
Right.
So that's what high church is. A lot of English churches, if you mention incense, and that's papist.
Well, I'm asked that sometimes, are you high church?
We swing incense, so
I
let them
know how
figure
to
that out.
answer. Thank you.
Well, I would say we would tend towards a definite, because the choir is dressed rather than being
Too warm.
and we try to process
Yes.
in and
Right. Okay, now I know how to answer.
Swing.
Yeah. I personally like the High Church stuff. I like the incense and all that. And she was associated with a theologian named Baron Frederick Hugel, who also wrote in there. They were friends, and he had an influence on her. And
He was concerned. Wonder what he was concerned about.
Pretty
If mysticism's good, wonder why.
Yeah, well, like not everybody feels that way, but
That's interesting. Spirits are mentor from 1921. That's just after the end of the First World War.
yeah,
Sort of strange time to pick up with a German mystic.
yeah, right.
That's after the
I mean, after
flu
the-
epidemic too.
After the flu epidemic, yeah, they killed off a few million in the war and a few million more in the flu.
Twice as many in the flu epidemic, at least maybe 3 times. I saw that figure yesterday. Something.
Yeah.
And that's before mustard gas.
Right.
Gosh, it was stupid.
Oh,
Of course, all war.
If that's gonna say.
Right. So she was good friends with Hugel, described as the most wonderful personality, saintly, truthful, sane, and tolerant.
Sane.
Was influenced by him towards charitable and more down-to-earth activities. Then after his death, she began to write more about the Holy Spirit, became more prominent in Anglican Church as a lay leader, spiritual retreat, spiritual director, guest speaker, radio lecturer, proponent of contemplative prayer. So after spending this time with Hugel and being influenced by him, she began kind of coming into her own as a spiritual leader,
Probably knew Marconi. So.
and ended up being a prominent leader in the Anglican Church, doing lectures and talks in churches and colleges. And
How do you spell the name Hugel? I can't.
Hugel, it has an umlaut. If you,
H-U-G-E-L.
She knows what an umlaut is.
yeah,
She's been trying to explain it to me for years.
yeah.
Umlaut.
Hugel. Fundamental axiom of hers is that all life is sacred, and that was what incarnation was about. We'll start talking about a little bit about some of the stuff she had to say in her writing here. She was educated at home, so for she to go.
Took Spanish over the TV.
look at that. Subsequently read history and botany.
Yeah, history and botany.
What a
What a combination.
Yeah, I know. It's like why? I don't know. Maybe that's what interested her, right?
Yes, yeah, because
Right. Yeah.
Never.
famous.
Was that Nelson?
That's the definition of liberal arts.
Yeah. Right. Sure.
I'm sorry.
Definition of
In
liberal.
Scotland, it's more Presbyterian. There's a big Presbyterian university seminary in Aberdeen.
Oh, is there? Okay.
Aberdeen.
So it used to be, well, of course, maybe because some members of Alyssa's family lived near there. They went to school at Aberdeen University. They would hike 60 miles there.
Each day for class?
Hike 60 miles at the start of the term. And hike 60
Yeah.
miles
Uphill both
back.
ways.
Got up early. Yeah.
She was the first woman to lecture to the clergy of the Church of England, as well as the first woman officially to conduct spiritual retreats for the church.
That's about as high as she could go, though. Being a
It
woman.
was back then, sure. Yeah. Mid-19th
How about
century.
King's College before we go? Where's that? Is that in England or is that
Or King's College, Cambridge,
Cambridge?
founded by Henry V.
I don't know.
Certainly very, very old.
She does also work on establishing ecumenical links between churches, and one of the first women theologians to lecture in English colleges and universities. So she definitely became very prominent and influential in her sphere.
Bookbinder.
Yeah, bookbinder. I found that interesting. Award-winning bookbinder.
Cass Bindery over in Bardstown.
Are they still there?
No, they're gone.
I know, you can't find anybody to find a book. Can you? There's one in the middle. There's a good story.
She also wrote for a magazine called The Spectator. The Spectator was a weekly British magazine, I think still is. Do you have any idea of that still? Ever heard of it?
I don't know.
It was first published in July of 1828, making it the oldest weekly magazine in the world.
Comparable to that.
So she wrote for them on a regular basis in politics, culture, and current affairs. And before she started writing her better, more well-known works on mysticism, she published a book of satirical poems on legal dilemmas.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, remember, her husband was a barrister and her father was a barrister. So she grew up in a legal world and lived in the legal world. Satirical poems on legal dilemmas called the Barlam's Ballad Book.
Wasn't it amazing?
That was probably the forerunner, right?
Legal dilemmas, yeah.
And then she wrote 3 highly unconventional, so profoundly spiritual novels. So she did these poetry and satirical works and fiction before moving into writing just about mysticism itself.
Sounds like she can do it all.
Yes.
Let's go.
Yeah, right.
I guess you don't have children, you got time to do a lot.
Right.
That's right.
They got windows and fishes.
Kids.
Anyway.
It does free up.
Her novels were called The Gray World, The Lost World, and The Column of Dust, published in 1904, 07, and 09.
It's interesting, she was around the time that the emancipation of women was going on.
Is that right?
Too, I'm not sure whether it was before or after the end of the First World War. But they got the right to vote, but they were
In England?
certainly
Or,
around that time.
right, sure.
She published 2 of those novels before she was married.
Is that right?
No, because she was married in 1907.
Yes.
But she's most well known for her book called Mysticism, A Study of the Nature and Development of Man's Spiritual Consciousness.
David, have you read any of these?
No,
Are you going to read any of them?
probably not, but I do have curiosity.
Yeah.
However, my curiosity list is very long, includes a lot of other books too. So
Yeah.
if I read any of them, I'd be interested in the one on
It might
mysticism.
be interesting. I would Google
She sounds,
biography.
Read
about her.
read the cliff notes.
Yeah.
she sounds terrifyingly intelligent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Terrifyingly.
Different plane for sure.
Practical mysticism. She wrote that. Is that what-
Yes, she did write Practical Mysticism. That's another one of her big mysticism books.
Practical habit. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be.
Right.
Well, yeah, it's a cookbook.
You can have it for $3.98 from Better World Books.
I think I'll go to the library. It's the third one.
So her big mysticism book is broken down in a couple parts. Part 1 is called The Mystic Fact, explaining the relation of mysticism to vitalism, psychology, theology, symbolism, and to magic. And part 2, The Mystic Way, explores the awakening, purification, illumination of the self, discusses voices and visions, and delves into manifestations from ecstasy and rapture to the dark night of the soul.
Oh,
The Column of Dust is a story about a woman's peek into the other world, the spiritual world from which our material world takes its form, and how she managed to stay grounded in the world of matter while being drawn to the world of spirit.
There you go. So even her fiction was all very mystical and
Love that name.
semi-autobiographical, perhaps.
She's a deep.
Okay, here's some quotes about her. She said, if God were small enough to be understood, he would not be big enough to be worshipped.
It was, yeah.
On every level of life, from housework to heights of prayer and all judgment efforts to get things done, hurry and impatience are sure marks of the amateur.
oh,
Can you repeat that once more?
On every level of life, from housework to heights of prayer and all judgment and efforts to get things done, hurry and impatience are sure marks of the amateur.
wow.
Yeah.
That's why our house goes undusted.
You're cruising for a bruising, buddy.
Yeah.
That's an interesting, from housework to heights of prayer. She was married to a barrister. her father was a barrister. I doubt whether she ever dusted.
How much
anything in her
housework she
life.
actually had,
The
yeah.
definition of housework is telling somebody to move this or do
Yeah,
that.
probably so.
Well, you have to order your dinner from the cook and tell the maids where to dust.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
right.
All right, sorry, but I'm, you know,
You digress.
You're trying, yeah, you're being influenced by
Needed with reality.
my cynicism.
this one.
Oh, this one. Oh, you want me to sit over there?
No.
Mysticism is the art of union with reality.
Arc? Is that what you said?
Art.
A-R-T-E.
Art. One of the lenses fell out of my glasses that I need to put on once in a while. I can't see.
The spiritual life of individuals has to be extended both vertically to God and horizontally to other souls. And the more it grows in both directions, the less merely individual and therefore more really truly personal it will become.
Said a lot in every sentence, didn't she?
She did, yeah.
God.
Well, it was 19th century England. That's why people wrote
Yeah.
very densely.
Brief, though. I mean,
Yeah.
that top one there,
Well,
if God was small enough to be understood, he would not be big enough to.
Right,
work.
that's
Yeah.
pretty
I mean,
concise.
that's
That's
a
an amazing
basic
statement,
really.
It's just concise, isn't it?
Yeah, right,
I
right.
was
I mean, it
trying to
says-
picture
It says it all.
it does.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites by her, actually.
And that's the sign of the cross, vertically to God and horizontally to others.
Right. Very good.
Wonder if the Romans knew that.
So she, Mystic in the Church was a book she wrote where she attempted to reconcile inherent tensions between mysticism and institutional religion. Her sympathy for mysticism was nuanced her understanding of what it means to participate in the body of Christ and what was the basis of ongoing critique for the foibles of the visible church.
The visible church.
Okay. She's born in the Anglican Church, but without a strong commitment. We talked about that earlier. Child of wealthy London lords, believing in God, helping the poor, but saw religion as dogmatic and bigoted, and the clergy as pompous and narrow. This is her early life. In her early life, she didn't have much use for the church.
Evidently.
But as she grew older, she became more obviously a leader.
Well, yeah, I mean, look how long it took for the Church of England to have allow
Oh yeah,
lady clergy. I mean, you know, talk about dogmatic. So she was growing up around the time of emancipation of the women.
mm-hmm.
She obviously was ahead of her time,
Right.
and I could see why she'd be pretty PO'd about things.
Yeah.
You know, ironically, there's plenty of evidence for women in particular the diaconate, but probably also as priests in even the New Testament times.
Yeah.
And in the Celtic Church, there's evidence there were female priests and deacons in like 3rd and 4th, 5th century, before Rome was able to get their influence on the British Isles. You know, because before Rome took over the British Isles, it was basically the Celtic Church. So there's plenty of historical precedents for women in the priesthood and the diaconate. And that somehow that's, for whatever reason, that was a Western domination thing that happened
Well,
with Western society, you know?
when the Romans took over Christianity and made it Roman Catholic,
Yeah,
it was a male-dominated society at
Right.
the time, and it continued that way.
for centuries.
Still is.
Still is, yeah. I mean, we've made progress, but there's no reason for it innately to be that way.
No,
Objectively, there's no reason for that. But
except the
History
people,
and-
the people in charge are keeping it that way.
right,
basically.
exactly, yeah. But yeah, she was in that age where women were starting to get more power and influence and opportunities in Britain as well as here in the States, you know. same thing was happening here around that time.
You know, the bishop still moves his priests around here. The Catholic bishop still moves them around every so many years so they don't get too indoctrinated with their parish and fall into bad ways.
Yeah.
Like
Didn't move fast enough.
co-celebrating communion with us Presbyterians and Episcopalians.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we used to have-
have that.
remember those ecumenical services when the three choirs would sing in each other's church? Our bishop, what's his face, didn't like that. So
Yeah.
I
He
didn't
put-
realize he didn't like it.
yeah, the one who's there now, he moved the first
Kurtz.
on who was,
Kurtz, Bishop, I think it's Kurtz.
Do it.
he,
Kurtz.
Kurtz,
Yeah, I think
the
the one
Catholic
before
Bishop
him was-
Kurtz, yeah.
one before him
Kelly.
was more liberal.
Mhm.
Kurtz, and then Kurtz moved the guy who was here on because he was,
Right.
yeah.
Didn't like us. He didn't want to
And they
be
used to-
in.
You know, I mean, there was one of the staff there was a nun. And, you know, every 3 months under the old father, the priest in charge,
Over
was
at
a-
Epiphany.
at Epiphany, she was
Yes.
allowed to give a sermon.
Yes.
And when the new priest came in,
Changed.
Is she
And-
gone?
she asked, she'd been there something like 15 years.
Yes.
She used to come to our fish fries and
Yes.
everything. She been there 15 years and she asked for a sabbatical for 3 months and the new priest refused to give it to her.
He was just waiting for an
Waiting
excuse.
for it.
Yes.
Exactly. So, you know, I'm sorry, it's still very,
We didn't
We
progress
should have
far.
signed her up.
we should have done.
Yeah. We used to have nuns, didn't we?
They still do, I think.
Yeah.
In
Are there
there
any
one
left?
nunnery somewhere.
I think- yeah.
Yeah, I think it's
Couldn't tell you.
out by Southern High School.
Bad place to put it.
He's cheesing.
She knows.
Very few Episcopalians in the South.
So Underhill discovered that in order to flourish, the mysticism needs the church. The mysticism
Sorry, I
can
have to
tend
go.
to,
I've got to
Okay.
watch
Go ring the bell.
mysticism can tend towards strangeness, vagueness, and sentimentality. Mystics who are not anchored in the church may drift into unintentional irrelevance. So she says the mystic needs the church for grounding.
Hmm.
But the church also, she says, needs the mystics for pushing, the edges of spirituality. So
We
she,
had one.
she said the church fosters group consciousness, gives a sense of unity, and offers both ready-made discipline and capacity to hand on a culture. And some more of her quotes that I like. Being, not doing, is the first aim of the mystic, and hence should be the first interests of the student of mysticism.
Is that further something wrong with doing?
No. No, I don't think so at all. I mean, in terms
It
of
wouldn't make sense.
your mystic experience,
Yeah, I guess.
it's more about being than doing. That's
That
not
makes
the
sense.
not the totality of who you are
Like the monks.
spiritually. Yeah.
Well, they were.
Life, a larger, richer, more satisfying life is in the last analysis the end of religion.
That previous sentence, being, not doing.
Mhm.
Read that once again.
Being, not doing, is the first aim of the mystic, and hence should be the first interest of the student of mysticism.
Right. That, it happens to you. You don't do something, a mystic.
Right.
If you have a mystical experience, it's not something that you particularly feel like you need to act on. It's just something that happens. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it reminds me again of Julian and Orwich, all her visions. The visions happened to her, but
Yeah.
But then afterwards, you write about it, so you do something with it,
Well,
just like Underhill did. She wrote about all her experiences.
she wrote about it, yeah, yeah.
But the mysticism itself is a being thing, not a doing thing.
In our modern age, we're more focused on doing,
Mm-hmm.
creating, fixing, doing something.
Being sort of a given, I guess.
Well, I think if something, I don't know, put in quotes, happens to you, I don't know if you can describe a mystical experience. It's not tangible, and it's not something you act on. It's just like, whoa, where'd that come from? And then you were thinking about it, you know, and trying to understand, is there a purpose? Why did I have this experience? Or do I just think about it?
Right. Those who have a deep and real inner life are the best able to deal with the irritating details of outer life.
The irritating details.
Yeah.
I like that second quote. Life, larger, richer, more satisfying. It's not length,
Yeah, right.
it's not size. So the purpose of religion should not be a prolongation of life as we know it, but instead a deepening of what it is.
Right. Not length, but depth, right?
Mm.
Eternity is with us, inviting our contemplation perpetually, but we are too frightened, lazy, and suspicious to respond, too arrogant to still our thought and let divine sensation have its way. And here's a long one, but kind of interesting. It needs industry and goodwill if we would make that transition, for the process involves a veritable spring cleaning of the soul, a turning out and rearrangement of our mental furniture, wide opening of closed windows, that the notes of the wild birds beyond our garden may come to us fully charged with wonder and freshness, and drown with their music the noise of the gramophone.
That's not short.
No.
Contrary.
There's her housework and prayer combined.
Yeah. Right. Spring cleaning of the
I don't know
soul.
what she was like to be around. She just at a different plane, different level. I mean, I wonder if she could just be one of the gangs.
Got to drown out the music of the gramophone within.
Yeah. And with the RCA dog. Really.
Picture her now, 100 years later, dealing with cell phones and all the other distractions of television.
She looks like an Apple girl. Apple woman, excuse me.
Well, you close yourself off when you need to.
And she further goes on with that to say, those who do this discover that they will have lived in a stuffy world, whilst their inheritance was a world of morning glory, where every titmouse is a celestial messenger, and every thrusting bud is charged with the full significance of life.
False.
Full
Oh,
significance.
good. I was going to say that ring, the false statement, when I thought you said false. Yeah, I like that.
Anyway, those are some of her writings and thoughts. Like I said, she believed the church needed mystics. The parochial, dogmatic, conservative churches had departed from their central mission to redeem the world by forming souls and fostering holiness among them.
So we need more. What do you advertise from? I mean, you know. mystics.
I think she was saying there's a role
Now
for them in the
hiring.
church. There's a role for people, mystics, to inspire, push people towards spiritual life.
Fostering holiness.
It was 9:55. Yep.
Good session, David. Good session.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, sure.
Very interesting, Dave.
Thanks.
See you, Nelson, Janice. Y'all be good.
Thank you, dears.